Hey, what's up, Rep Church? How you doing? Hey, it's so good to see you. My name is Drake. I'm the pastor of City Church in Boulder, Colorado, and we wouldn't be there without you, so put your hands together for that. Just a couple of quick, just want to celebrate, man. Grateful for your pastors, Randy and Amy, and grateful to be a part of this weekend gathering with you. We launched City Church 3 years ago in Boulder, and then we turned 1 year old, and we celebrated, was so excited, and then COVID showed up. And we were so excited for that too. I'm sure you were as well. We did a grand reopening at the end of that year back in January of 21. And God has done amazing things in and through our community over the last 3 years. And none of it's possible without churches like you financially investing in our plant and praying for us. So thank you so much for your radical generosity. Put your hands together one more time for having... Man, it's so cool. For just having a vision bigger than yourselves. I've heard it a lot already in the DNA here, but I just want to celebrate. Not only have you helped plant City Church, but since we launched 3 years ago, we have partnered with 5 other church planters, 4 in the Denver metro area to help them plant, and then 1 in Chicago. So we have 5 life-giving churches on the ground thanks to God working in and through our community. Super cool. And in addition, we have 3 different missions agencies and partners and church planters all around the world that we're partnering with today. And this coming March, we are sending out our very first missionaries across the world that we get to just have the privilege of sending out. So way to go, God. And way to go, you guys. So I just want you to understand, man, when you invest in the local church and when you invest in the kingdom, it's not even just for City Church on the ground for 3 years, but already there's multiplication in the kingdom because of your investment. So grateful for you and your church. So glad to be here today. All right, as we get into the conversation, I like this title. I want a faith like that. Have you guys been enjoying this series? Man, crushing it. It's been so good. I hopped online. I was sneaking around trying to see. All right. What's been on the table so far? Randy told me all the things I wasn't allowed to speak on. All right, so you have no idea what you're getting today. But as we get into it, you ever had any doubts? You ever had any doubts? Especially like when it comes to this faith in Jesus stuff, you ever have any doubts? Okay, good. Yeah, you guys are honest. That's great. Like the good church answer would have been no. Like, no, we don't doubt. No. Right? You ever been wrestling with like the tension of who Jesus is and what he says he can do in your life and then just your own life experience and somehow like it feels disconnected? Or then the world outside of you, just all around you, the hard questions and all the hard stuff of life up against, the things that you're supposed to know and supposed to say, and you're like, that's a little bit of tension. You ever feel that? Well, welcome to the club. Thank you so much, because I didn't know, I thought this might just be a confession today, so I'm so glad we're on the same page. Doubt is a normal part of following Jesus, and in fact, our doubt does not disqualify us in the least bit. And so I was reading in Matthew 28, and this stood out to me in a way that I've never really seen it before, so I want to share it with you today. This is right after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and so the disciples, they're kind of disoriented is a good word for it. So they were like, they're like believing in Jesus, and then they unbelieved in Jesus, and then they rebelieved in Jesus, right? All that happened in the last couple of days. And so now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And then when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And I was like, what? Like, these are his guys. Like, the 11, like, the dudes, you know what I'm saying? Like, these are his boys. And you're like, they're supposed to be in it. And some worship, I wonder who it is. Doubting Thomas is probably in there, right? If we're guessing. But, like, but some doubted. And I was like, man, who is it? We can poke at them and pick at them a little bit. But it's interesting. We're not going to deal with it right now, but Jesus doesn't even seem to blink at their doubt. I kind of expect this to happen, and then Jesus to be like, for real? And then turn to the guys that worshiped. All right, you guys go make disciples. The rest of you, you're out. See you later. You should have had more faith. But he doesn't even acknowledge it. He just keeps rolling. All of them, worshipers and doubters together. You guys ready? You're about to flip the world upside down. And so it's a pretty amazing space that we can pick at them for a minute if we wanted to. But I think if we flipped the angle of how we look at this, it's pretty amazing that these guys still showed up in their doubt. So Jesus tells them to go to this mountain, and they still showed up. And I don't know about you guys, but that's a pretty amazing space to be. That I can still show up when I have doubts that I'm wrestling with. And so I just want to invite you. Like, I want a faith like that shows up even in my doubts. Like Jesus, he's not intimidated, but I want a faith that shows up on the good days when all the things are great, and I want a faith that shows up when things are just falling apart around me and I have no idea where God is in the middle of it. I want a faith that shows up when I'm full of faith, and I want a faith that shows up when I'm full of doubt. I want faith that shows up and keeps showing up in the daily disciplines of like scripture and prayer. You know, that whole walking with Jesus thing, all the stuff that we do about spending time with him. Like, I want to keep doing that on the daily to be with Jesus even when I haven't heard God's voice in a while. Like, I want a faith like that. Like, man, I know you're there. I don't know where you are. Maybe you're napping, but I'm showing up for you anyway. He doesn't nap. He didn't have to. Actually, Jesus did nap, but that's a different story for a different day. I want a faith that keeps showing up in large gatherings like this one to worship, to use my gifts to serve and to pour out for others, even when, as I'm giving, I feel like I'm giving more in this season than I'm getting. I want a faith that shows up in that space. I want a faith that shows up for my neighbors and my coworkers and my family members and all the friends around me that are far from God. And I want to keep praying for them and loving them and serving them, even though it seems like it's impossible that they're ever going to encounter the love of God and make a decision to follow Jesus. I want a faith that keeps showing up in that space. I want a faith that keeps showing up in love and forgiveness in my relationships, even when I've been hurt and overlooked and misunderstood. I want a faith that keeps showing up in genuine prayer for the miraculous, because we believe God's heart is inclined toward that, even though it doesn't seem like God has come through up to this point, and I have no idea how he's possibly gonna do it. Just me? All right, cool. I want a faith that keeps showing up in my small group to grow, to serve, to be accountable, to live on mission together, and to empower others, even though I'm super intimidated by being vulnerable in community. I want a faith that keeps showing up in generosity by investing in the mission of the local church in the kingdom of God, even though bills are really tight and things are a little hard. And I know Jesus promised about taking care of the lilies, but all I can think about is like the lilies don't have a mortgage. But I'm going to trust you anyway, Jesus, right? Like, I want a faith that keeps showing up in that. I want a faith that keeps showing up in faithfulness to the way of Jesus and to the scriptures, even though we're walking through intense cultural moments and tensions when I'm like, how do I love the person far from God that I disagree with, but I still want to hold the space? And how do I walk in the tensions and the uncomfortable stuff? And you know what? There's some stuff in there I don't even know what I believe about, but I'm trying to be faithful to Jesus, and I want to be in that tension, right? I want the faith that keeps showing up even in the middle of the what ifs and the doubts. How about you guys? Sweet, let's go home. I'm so glad that's perfect. I want a faith like that, but I think one of the questions that we have to ask is, where does a faith like that come from? It's one thing to want it, but where does it come from? And I think it starts by understanding the invitation from the one that we are putting our faith in. And so let's back up from Matthew 28 for a second, and let's just dig in. What does the invitation from Jesus look like? And listen, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey today, you are loved, safe, and welcome here. And the heart here is to help you take some next steps. And I'm just letting you know, Jesus is chasing after you, and he loves you. And if you're a follower of Jesus in the room, Jesus has so much more for you. I told the first service this: I think Jesus sees way more in you than you and I see in ourselves. And that's really, really good news. And so you got to ask the question, like, how did these guys become disciples? Like how did they end up on the mountain with Jesus, doubting and worship? Like, how did they get to that space? And I don't know what you know about the story of Jesus, but he didn't show up on the scene and say, hey guys, I'm Jesus, Son of God, ta-da, here we go. A few parlor tricks, and said, hey, you know what, listen, believe in me and you'll go to heaven when you die. And everybody's like, sweet, sign me up for that. That wasn't the invitation at all. Some of you heard that invitation. It's a little incomplete for what it's worth. That wasn't the invitation at all. What was the invitation from Jesus? Let me show you. So Jesus, passing along, we'll just walk through Mark for a second. Passing along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Mark chapter 2. He went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And then he rose and followed him. It's really amazing. Jesus sees some fishermen, just nobodies, invites them. Okay, that's cool, way to go, Jesus. But now we're inviting a tax collector, which everyone hates their guts. And now that means also that the other two dudes have to hang out with this guy. And they're like, Jesus, we followed you. We didn't sign up for this guy. So Jesus is inviting a lot of people. And what's the invitation? Follow me. Let me show you another one. Jesus goes up on the mountain, and he called to him those whom he desired. Don't miss this. The invitation from Jesus is come to me before it is go for me. he called to himself those whom he desired. At the heart of following Jesus is the invitation into relationship. We don't follow Jesus out of obligation. We follow him out of loving invitation, that he actually wants to be with us, which is amazing when you think about it. Because if I told you all the stuff inside of me, you wouldn't want to be with me, right? I mean, it's a miracle my wife still desires me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's only the Holy Spirit that keeps her in this game. And so Jesus calls to himself those whom he desires. I just need you to know, listen, no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, this is the heart of Jesus for you. He desires to be with you. And then they came to him, meaning there's responsibility on the part of the invitation for you and I to respond. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might what? Be with him. So this is amazing. What's the responsibility? What's the invitation? The invitation is to be with Jesus. And then so the responsibility on us is to be with him. And then he does something that we can't quite do on our own. He would send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. This is an amazing tension. I want you to think about it for a second. Our responsibility as Jesus followers is to be with him. And then he does in and through us what we cannot. He sends us out to preach. And you might be like, I'm not about that life. I'm not a preacher. Not going to do it. This word in the Greek literally means to make public through. The call of every Jesus follower. Whether you're an engineer or a barista or a pastor or a stay-at-home mom, a neighbor, a family member. Listen, you guys are about to be around a bunch of people this week on Thanksgiving you don't even like. Or maybe you're the person that they don't like. I don't know which side of that you're on. But Jesus is sending you out to make public through. He wants to make his life and his love public through you. You guys got it? So our responsibility is to be with Jesus, and he does in and through us what only he can do. But we still have to show up. Now, this is important. One of my mentors says it this way. He says that everything that Jesus wants to do in and through your life and my life, he will do out of the overflow of our relationship with him. It starts with relationship. So, one more. Mark 8, calling the crowds to himself with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. You guys got the invitation? Follow me, follow me. Over and over again. Now, on first century ears, this invitation had a very clear understanding. Jesus is known as a lot of things. I want you to think about it for a second. What is Jesus known for? Like, who was Jesus? Okay, like he called himself the Son of God and Messiah. I mean, Jesus was a really good bartender. The wedding, water to wine. You know, he was like a gourmet chef, feeding of 5,000. I mean, Jesus was a table flipper. Jesus was friend of sinners. But more than anything else in the New Testament, out of the 90 different interactions we have with Jesus, a little over 60 of those interactions, Jesus is referred to and he's called Rabbi. Rabbi. Over 60 times out of the 90, he's called Rabbi. And first century Jews, this audience that he's walking around, they would have understood that this was a clear invitation from a rabbi to follow him. And I need you to understand this is not unique with Jesus. There's plenty of rabbis, plenty of disciples, so this language is not unique, but the invitation was clear, and it's lost on us in our individual kind of Western, my own Instagram profile. Just me? Okay, cool. So let me show you. What does it mean to be a disciple? This word in the Hebrew that Jesus would have used would have been talmidim. Can you guys say that? Talmidim. So Jesus would say, hey, follow me. It's an invitation to be a talmidim. And here's what that means. Literally, it's an invitation to be a follower, a student, or an apprentice under Jesus. So it's not an invitation. Believe in me, go to heaven when you die. Live the rest of your life however you want to. Try to be a semi-moral person and it'll all work out in the end. Just don't kill anybody. Right? Like, that's not that's a good advice. But that's not it. The invitation is to be a follower, a student, an apprentice. And so when you were invited by a rabbi, I need you to understand, only the elite of the elite got invited to be a talmidim. Very few people got this invitation from any rabbi. You had to be the sharpest crayon in the box. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had to make it. And then three things. What does it mean to be a talmidim? In the first century, your life revolved around three things when you became a talmidim of a rabbi. Number one, your job was to be with your rabbi 24/7. Be with your rabbi 24/7. Everywhere the rabbi went, you went. Everywhere he slept, everything he's doing, you're with him. Number two, it was to become like your rabbi, to learn from him, to do the things that he did, to learn everything in his way of life, if you will. And the last thing was to do what your rabbi did. Literally, the invitation to go and make disciples was the exact invitation. You apprentice under a rabbi so you can then become a rabbi. Go and make disciples. This is not original with Jesus. So what does this mean for kind of from first century Israel to McKinney, Texas, right before Thanksgiving? What does it mean? What does it mean to follow Jesus? I would argue it's the exact same things. The first invitation is this: to be with Jesus. To be with Jesus. That relationship is the invitation. And the overflow of relationship, it's intimacy with Jesus that overflows into ministry for Jesus. The word ministry is just a word that means serve. That the overflow of my life, no matter what I'm doing with my life, the central focus is being with Jesus. Jesus says, come to me, before he says, go for me. But they're not disconnected. There's not a sequence. It's not like come to me and be with Jesus for 3 years, and then eventually you're ready to go. They're meant to work in tandem. So you might ask the question, how do we be with Jesus? Like, is this just a little bit of quiet time? Is this a good worship song in your car? Is this coming to church like, hey, Jesus, I'm with you every Sunday. Like, isn't that enough? Spend time with you there. Ask your wife how she feels about that. Let's see how that goes. You guys get that? Once a week? Anyway, all right, cool. So my wife would not appreciate, hey girl, once a week, 10:30, I'm yours. Sundays, 10:30, I'm your man. I'm busy the rest of the week, but 10:30, you got my attention. So, be with Jesus. What does it mean? We talk a lot about the spiritual disciplines, right? The things that we do to kind of cultivate life in God, these practices, if you will, like reading the Bible, journaling, prayer, silence, solitude, fasting, Sabbath, all these like things, that you do as Christians. Like, why do we do those things? Listen, they're a means to an end. The goal is not, I read my Bible. Gold star for you. The goal is not, I went to church. The goal is not, I prayed some prayers. The goal is not, I memorized a verse. Those are all good things, but if we miss the relationship attached to them, we miss everything. Because the best part of following Jesus is Jesus. You guys with me on that? He's the whole point. It's a means to an end, that I sit in the scriptures and in prayer, and I fast, and I cultivate these different spiritual disciplines so that I can kind of bring my focus back to being with Jesus. You and I, we have the attention span of a goldfish today. Some of you are like, what'd he say? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so now more than ever, we need a constant refocusing into the most important relationship of our lives, being with Jesus. Religion is an invitation to do stuff for Jesus, but you and I are invited into relationship, which first starts with being with Jesus. So how's it going for you? Rev Church is an incredible church that can equip you to be with Jesus in the very simple spiritual disciplines of daily and intimately. But it doesn't stop there. Number two, become like Jesus. This could also be a word. It's kind of a Bible-y, churchy word. Sanctification. You guys heard of that before? Sanctification simply means, it could be called spiritual formation, the idea of becoming more like Jesus when you, over time. So how many of you gave your life to Jesus and you were instantly perfect, Jesus 2.0? How many of you? Anybody? Yeah, let's go right here. You should be up here preaching. All right, so most of us, except for the few super people in here, Jesus really loves you guys. Most of us, you make the decision to follow Jesus, to trust in him, to save you and set you free, but you still have some struggles and stuff that needs to be worked out, don't you? You still got some depression or some anger or some anxiety or some frustration or some control issues or some money issues or all of those if you're like me. You know what I mean? You just got some issues, right? And I need some tissues for my issues. So we got those issues, and the question is okay, so do we just walk with those and try really hard, grit our teeth, be stressed out, be really sorry when we make a mistake but don't ever get any better? Is that the goal of the Christian life, is just hope that by osmosis you become more like Jesus? No, that's not how it works. We become like Jesus through this idea of spiritual formation. Let me show you from Dallas Willard. This is beautiful. He says spiritual formation in the Christian tradition is a process of increasingly being possessed and permeated by the character traits of Jesus as we walk in the easy yoke of discipleship with Jesus, our teacher. It's a process of being transformed from the inside out. So it's not like behavior modification. I met Jesus and I stopped using dirty words, therefore I'm a better person. No, your heart's still crooked on the inside. Listen, I don't have to use cuss words to be mean with my words, right? So what about that part? Jesus wants to transform us from the inside out. And I don't want to just like hold it together in a moment. I want to be the kind of person that is patient, that is kind. And there's days that Jesus is working that out in me, and there's other days where I just fall flat on my face, right? So what is it? It's constantly being formed to become like my rabbi. Now, I need you to get this. We're all disciples of something. All of us are being formed by something or someone. All you have to do to be formed tomorrow is wake up. We call it at City Church unintentional spiritual formation. That you are being discipled by the machine around you, whether you want it or not. So the good news is you and I have a choice of who and what we're being formed by. And so that's the invitation from Jesus. By pressing into community, by pressing into the spiritual disciplines, and by pressing into Jesus' way of life and his way of thinking, I begin to be transformed from the inside out. But again, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. But the last thing is to do what your rabbi did, to do what Jesus did. So apprenticeship, what's the goal, right? If you're an apprentice in the real world, the goal is that you apprentice under someone so that eventually you can take over that trade or you can start your own practice. The goal of an apprentice is to eventually own the thing that you are being trained to do. And the invitation from Jesus is not just to be with Jesus and become like Jesus and feel better about ourselves. It's to take up and join with him in the mission that he has called us to. That the same mission that he was chasing after you with is the same one we are joined in with him to help other people far from God come into the incredible family of God. That's the invitation, to do what Jesus did. And how that works itself out is way bigger than the time we have conversation for today. I think I just said that like totally backwards. I'm like dyslexic a little bit sometimes, but we'll keep rolling. I need you to get it. The goal is not to know all about Jesus. It's to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. We have more information than we probably need, if we're being honest. In the Western world today, you and I, honestly, if we could just obey like 10% of what we know Jesus has already told us to do, we would be different people and the world would be a better place. That's the invitation. And so it's really interesting that for the invitation from Jesus in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples is not reserved for the elite like it would have been for every other rabbi. It's expected from the ordinary, that all of us own this part of following Jesus. And so we're supposed to follow Jesus where we are, in the spaces where we live, work, and play. Whether I'm an engineer or a student or a son or a daughter or a neighbor or a friend or an at-home mom or an IT person or working at Target, Jesus is the focal point of my life, and all of these things are being produced in and through me. So let's look at the invitation one more time from Mark chapter 8, okay? Calling the crowd to himself with his disciples. I want you to notice that Mark distinguishes. With Jesus, there is a crowd, and there are his disciples. And at this point, this wouldn't be the 12. This would be hundreds, maybe thousands of his disciples, people who have responded to the invitation to follow Jesus. And Mark tells us there's crowds there, and there's disciples. And one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, which group are we in? And he says to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. This invitation hits pretty heavy for me because I feel like Jesus has been doing this in and through me over the last month or so. But the first thing I want you to see is that the invitation is to become a disciple, not a Christian. The invitation is to become a disciple, not a Christian. The word disciple is used 268 times in the New Testament, and the word Christian is used 3. And so the Christian, like what we do here is, unfortunately, especially like in the buckle of the Bible belt, you know what I mean, where we are today, the word Christian means like believe in Jesus, go to church, live a semi-moral life, kind of learn more about Jesus. And at the end of the day, it's more about Jesus following you than you following Jesus. You know, I'm a Cowboys fan and a Christian, you know? It's like that versus an invitation to be a disciple, which again is what? To be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. And the separation that someone could believe in Jesus and not follow him is totally alien to Jesus himself. But we have a culture that if you surveyed, I think it was Barna did a survey, 78% of people that you surveyed in the U.S. currently would say that they're believers or Christians. But then when you ask specifically, are they following Jesus? It went from 76% to 8%. And this is not meant to throw rocks. This is meant to clarify the invitation that Jesus loves us and he has something better for us than going to church trying to be a good person and giving a little bit of money every now and then. Jesus has got way better for you. And so let me show you this quote from Dallas Willard. I think it speaks to this space. He says, the greatest issue facing the world today, I want you to think about that. Pulled out a piece of paper right now and wrote the top 10 greatest issues facing our world today. It's pretty easy to fill out, isn't it? I bet that this would not make the list, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's just not our go-to, but I think that's part of the problem. The greatest issue, and I feel this in my own heart, facing the world today with all of its heartbreaking needs is whether those who are identified as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens into every corner of human existence. And you might ask the question, how is that the greatest issue facing our world today? I believe that the reason this is the greatest issue facing our world today is because if you and I press into this reality and more disciples press into what it means to truly follow Jesus, the overflow of that decision is going to deal with all of the other issues we see in the world around us. So loneliness and brokenness and isolation and people taking their lives because of the space of this, right? All of a sudden you've got people just invading the corners, every corner of human existence. This is not the church waiting for people to walk in on a Sunday. This is the church living on mission everywhere that God has placed you. Where you live, work, and play, that's where you're called. You have influence with people that myself and Randy and Amy will never have influence with. And you know what? If they come to Rev Church, amazing. There's a really good chance they're going to meet Jesus here, right? Amazing. But you know what? There's a bunch of my neighbors and friends that I can invite them 1,000 times to come with me to church on a weekend. Guess what? They're not coming. At least not today. And so I could let the only thing I ever do is invite them to church. If that's the best way I can love them, is that really the best way I can love them? Or could I begin to meet them where they are, like Jesus did with Matthew? This is the invitation of a disciple. Be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what he did. Second thing is this invitation is open to anyone. I need you to get it. No matter where you are on your spiritual journey today, no matter what's been done to you, no matter what you have done, no matter the guilt and the shame and the voices in your head, this invitation is open to everyone. The depressed and the guilty, the broken, the abused, the angry, the abuser. It's open to every single person to follow Jesus. And you know this, but I've got to remind us that this kind of life, it doesn't just happen. Right? You don't trust in Jesus and all of a sudden all of this is just a reality in you. It takes practice, and it takes practice in community. That's why the local church is so important. It's why more than just shoulder to shoulder, you have face-to-face people in your life that know your name and know what's going on the inside and are helping you become the person that Jesus is forming you into. The question, you guys remember the WWJD bracelets? Like, what would Jesus do? You guys remember that? A better question would be, what would Jesus do if he were me? My stage of life, my gender, my socioeconomic status, my season of life, where I live, work, and play. What would Jesus do if he were me? You gotta be careful, don't flip it. Not what would I do if I were Jesus. All I can think of is like Bruce Almighty. You guys remember that movie? Not that, no. Although I would love to part a bowl of soup. Like that would be, but other than that, no, that's not what we're talking about, right? What would Jesus do if he were me? That's a pretty sobering question for me, because it begins to make me think about how I spend my time and what I focus on and what I let in my mind and how I speak to others and who I see and who I overlook, what I think about myself, what I think about others. this way of Jesus, it assumes a lifetime of practice. But I need you to get it that the invitation is not about trying really hard for Jesus, because that's where we get discouraged, right? Some of you tried really hard to change, and you've never seen any progress, and you're like, why do I feel so stuck? Part of it is that Jesus is not inviting you to try, but he is inviting you to train. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to run a marathon tomorrow. Monday morning, 26.2 miles. And let's just say that you don't work out. I mean, I know all of you do. You're looking pretty swole in the room today, but let's just say in theory, you're not physically ready to run a marathon tomorrow, okay? And let's just say you wake up and you just hit it. Bam, ready to go, 6 a.m., 26.2 miles, and you hit it tomorrow. What happens? Randy has to do your funeral later that day. That's what happens. You die because you are not ready. You're not the kind of person that runs a 26.2 mile marathon yet. But here's what I need you to get. Listen, with the appropriate amount of training and diet and exercise and one less slice of pie on Thursday, right? With some time and intentional formation, guess what? Maybe a couple of months, maybe a year from now, you could be the kind of person that runs a marathon, couldn't you? What's the difference? It's a process. There's a training that goes into it, but don't miss it. 26.2 miles, if you train all year, is still gonna be really hard. Even if you're the kind of person that can now run a marathon, it's still gonna be a marathon. And unless you put some grizzly bears behind me or something, I'm not very motivated on my own, right? And so listen, I need you to get it. Part of spiritual formation, sometimes we hey, I'm gonna follow you, Jesus, and things are gonna get better. And they will. But it depends on whose definition we're working with. Life is still going to be hard when you follow Jesus. But life with Jesus when it's hard is unbelievable. And you can become the kind of person that walks through the hard things of life, and you look more like Jesus than you did yourself. You can be the kind of person that is full of joy instead of anxiety. You can be the kind of person that is full of peace instead of full of stress and anger. You can be the kind of person that is full of wisdom instead of full of foolishness. But it takes training with Jesus. So, we trust in Jesus to be saved. We train with Jesus to be formed. That's the invitation today. So let me give you the last thing here as we wrap it up. Matthew chapter 28. Jesus came and said to them, this is right after the doubters and worshipers are there. And he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe or obey all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So this is how it ends. Be with Jesus, become like Jesus, do what Jesus did. And he ends with this very clear invitation that I don't want you to miss. This word disciple, go and make disciples, is a noun, not a verb. Go and make are the verbs. Disciple is a noun. What does this mean? First of all, it means that you in the room today are either are or you are not a disciple. But also this might change how we think about what it means to be with Jesus, become and do what he did. Think about, switch the words for a minute. Sometimes we talk about discipleship. Who are you discipling? Who are you Christianing? Who are you believering? Who are you followering? It doesn't really, it gets clunky, doesn't it? Because it's not meant to be a verb, it's a noun. And so here's what this means for you and I. If you think disciple or apprentice, if you think of that word as a verb, then what it means is it's something being done to you. It puts the responsibility on someone else. Like, no one has discipled me. No one is investing in me at Rev Church. No one is no one's discipling me. But that's not what's being said here. If it's a noun, what it's speaking to is your identity. Not what you do or what's been done to you, but who you are. And it puts the responsibility not on someone else, but on you. I'm a disciple. And this is not meant to be individualistic, as in you don't need community. Because odds are, if you pray for patience, God's not just going to endow patience on you. He's going to put somebody in your small group that just irritates the mess out of you, right? That's how you're going to be formed in patience. And it's not trying, it's training, but I want you to get that. Jesus says, go and do what I did. Make disciples, as in introduce people far from God to my love so that they can become a disciple. Baptize them, as in they identify externally with me, that they're followers of me, which is really interesting. Don't miss it. The assumption here is you get baptized after you become a follower of Jesus. That means that you and I are making disciples with someone way before they trust in Jesus. So I got friends and coworkers and neighbors that have no idea that I'm making disciples, right? I'm like, they don't even know. The assumption is you're going to meet people far from God where they are, and you're going to get them to this place where they trust in Jesus because they've seen Jesus' life and his love in and through you. And then you're going to teach them to observe or to obey. I used to quote this and I'd be saying, yeah, make disciples, baptize them, teach them. No, teach them to obey. As in, one of the primary goals of following Jesus is to hear and obey, as in a rhythm. That his words and his heart are good for us and we can trust him. And some of you are like, bro, it's not for me. I'm all about being with Jesus. I'm even okay with becoming like Jesus, even though it's hard, but like doing what Jesus did, I don't know. I told you at the beginning, I think Jesus sees in you way more than you see in yourself. But don't miss how he lands the plane. It's amazing. And he says, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. I want you to think about it. Jesus is standing there in the flesh. What do you think he wants them to feel in this moment? I think he wants them to feel as if he's actually going to be with them. Like, I'm going to work on Monday and Jesus is right there. They know what that feels like, and he says, hey, I'm still with you. So then I'm at work, and Jesus, what do I say here? Jesus, what do I do here? Jesus, help over here. Jesus, what about this? And he's like, just imagine if he's with you in that way. That's exactly what he's after. That's the confidence you and I have to walk as apprentices under our rabbi. And so the last few months, this is where we've been as a church, is just wrestling with this reality. City Church has grown a lot. Lots of people are meeting Jesus and being baptized. But God pointed out, just in a very simple space, hey, we're not quite doing this. So we ran the numbers. 93,000 people in our city far from God, 110,000 people in our city total. So 93% of our population, they don't know Jesus. 150 people in City Church right now. God's doing amazing things. We're grateful. If we reached, let's just say 900 people came to faith in Jesus and were baptized over the next 3 years, it'd be amazing. City Church grew to 1,000 people, and most of them were people coming to faith. We'd celebrate that big time, right? Just be a move of God. It'd be amazing. It'd be a mega church in our city. But it'd still only be 1% of our population. That means that lostness in my city would go from 93% to 92%. And so, as much as we want to celebrate all that God is, and we're grateful for that, we realize the call is to so much more. Jesus reminded me, he said, hey, I didn't just call you to plant a church. I called you to reach a city. And you're not going to do it. Like, I'm all about big C church and kingdom, all that stuff, absolutely. But you and I have a responsibility. So the dream for City Church in 2023 is that my staff and I, we're going to get out of the way. We're going to empower and equip people to do this very thing. And we want to see every single person that's a follower of Jesus in City Church baptize one of their friends themselves. Because no one special gets the authority of baptism, right? All of us. And then we want them to get out of the way so that the person that they introduce to Jesus baptizes one of their friends. The clearest invitation that I see here from Jesus is that you and I have not made disciples until the disciples that we have made are making disciples. And I'll be honest, we've been working our tails off for 3 years, and in some ways we're doing great. And I'm grateful for that, but in some ways we're missing the mark. So the very simple invitation for you is, what does it look like for you today? I want a faith like that. I want to be with Jesus and become like Jesus and do what he did. But what is it for you? He's with you. He's in you. He's put you in places where you live, work, and play with people far from God that might come to Rev and might not, but he's put you there for a reason. So what's your next step? What's your area of obedience? Some of you in the room, you're not followers of Jesus, and I need you to know the very first invitation for you is to simply to be with Jesus. And so if you've never said yes to Jesus today, I want to give you a chance to do that. Others of you, you're followers of Jesus in the room, and you just have been struggling even with the simple cultivation of spiritual disciplines, not spending time with Jesus daily and intimately in the scriptures and in prayer, not letting his thoughts get into your thoughts and his heart get on your heart. It's really hard to become like Jesus when we're not with him. Some of you, you're forming, but you got to bring some accountability into your life. You got to be transparent in your small group. You got to invite people who are trustworthy, love Jesus, and love you enough that they're going to hold you to the things. They're going to give you that hard love that you need. They're going to know your stuff and kind of be shock-proof, and they're not going to run away, but they're going to love you well through it. And so you can be formed and start training. And others of you, well, all of us, asking the question, what would Jesus do if he were me in my circles of influence? Whatever it is for you, I want to encourage you. Just take a step, because Jesus meets us in that doubt. Jesus, I have no idea how you're going to help. I have no idea how you're going to heal this addiction. I have no idea how you're going to help me get my friend to you. I have no, and in a little bit of doubt, Jesus meets us in that space and gives us more. The last piece of encouragement I would give you is if you feel like God hasn't been speaking in a while, you're like, man, I just don't know what God's up to, or it's kind of quiet around here. It's very possible that God won't give you and I a next step until we do the very last thing he told us to do. If we ignored the last thing he said, I don't know why he would give us more. Some of you, you're not experiencing the power of God in your life because you haven't taken the step of baptism. The very clear next thing you're supposed to do after trusting Jesus. So I just want to encourage you to look back and say, all right, God, what is my next step? If you're not a follower of Jesus in the room, I want to invite you today to join the family of God. Very simply, you can do it by praying this prayer alongside me and the rest of the church today. Just repeat after me. God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for sending Jesus for me. Be my Lord. Be my Savior. Forgive me of my sin. Forgive me for doing life my way. Show me your way. Fill me with your Spirit. Guide me by your word. And make me who you created me to be. Amen. Put your hands together. Listen. If you're online with us or you're in person today and you're praying this prayer for the first time, or maybe you prayed this prayer 1,000 times and you've never meant it and you knew it, if for the very first time this has been the reality for you and you're giving your life to Jesus, we want to celebrate with you. And so if you made that decision today, I want you to text New Me to the number on the screen. We would love to walk with you because we don't want to just leave you in believing and making a decision. We want to help you be a follower of Jesus. And so let us know that you made that decision so we can celebrate with you, so we can see you take a next step in baptism. And no matter where you are today, listen, take that next step in obedience, invite your community into it, and let's just see what God wants to do in and through Rev Church and City Church as we build the kingdom together. Let's say goodbye to our online audience on 3. 1, 2, 3. Love you guys. And you